Story 1. A fair number of people were stressed about and therefore remediated the millennium bug. A few religious fanatics had a moment, but other than that, it was mostly people going extra hard and listening to that Prince song a lot. A bigger transition was pre- and post-September 11 attacks. Story 2. I remember my boss had us come in for 3 days straight leading up to New Year's Day and manually go into our database at work to change the dates on our project reports to 2000 instead of 00. Our information technology guy quit because he kept telling him there was no reason to and that he tested the changeover and it was going to work just fine with no issues. But the owner was a nutball and he was convinced otherwise by his friends, who were also rich, mindless idiots. The information technology guy said, "You're going to screw up the entire database doing what you're asking, and I won't be here to fix it because I quit." And he did. We worked 14 hours a day for 3 days, 50 of us in the department, doing thousands of date changes each. I think it was like 350,000 in total. And on January 1st, 2000, when the computers were supposed to go mental and the world was supposed to end, nothing happened, except in our database projects, where the dates were changed to 2000. When the dates switched over, all the dates switched to 200,000, because the system just went with 00, along with our manually entered 2000 inputs. So every single date was wrong and it was showing the wrong day and date, and we had to spend even more time going in and manually removing the 2000 from every project so that it would go back to normal. The owner blamed the information technology guy, saying he sabotaged the entire process. The information technology guy, over the phone, called him a dumb fool, and hung up the phone in the middle of the owner trying to threaten him with a lawsuit. Good times. Story 3. As a kid, around 10, it felt like any other New Year's with a small sense of foreboding. I had heard that computers wouldn't know what to do after 99, like they wouldn't count to 100 or something, and this could have catastrophic effects like a total power grid shutdown or back to the Stone Age and so on. Other reports said lesser apocalyptic stories. But I still thought there was a small possibility that once the ball dropped, all the lights would turn off. When it didn't happen, life went on, and I happily ate leftover appetizers before being ushered off to bed. Story 4. I, and many like me, spent a couple of years changing software and testing it to ensure there were as few problems as possible due to the change of dates. Our work hasn't done this. There have been a lot of problems with any business or government department that used mainframes or stored their data on mainframes. Story 5. Well, while most people were worried about computers being shut down, my naive religious family had my 10-year-old self in a church praying for their souls because Jesus promised to come back in 2,000 years or something similar. It had me really scared. I am critical of religion and adults who indoctrinate children. Story 6. It was an interesting experience. I was 18 at the time and I was hanging out with some friends that night. Most of them seemed pretty underwhelmed, like it was not a big deal. I was pretty excited, though. To me, the new millennium represented the future. I had my whole adult life ahead of me, with nothing but possibilities. Intellectually, I knew that the year 2000 was just an arbitrary number. There is nothing inherently special about it. But I still felt like I was part of something. I was going to see events and technologies that people had dreamed of for decades and some that no one had ever dreamed of before. I had no specific expectations for the future. I was just happy I was going to be a part of it. Story 7. We went from neon colors and funky shapes and patterns to dull, dead, gray, corporate lifeless beigeness. We used to be able to hang out at the mall all day and not go broke or get bored. Now the malls are all closed. You used to go outside and see a good 20% of your neighbors. Now everyone is inside on their phones. There was no computer-generated imagery in the movies. With no phones, people used to actually do things. Parks would be packed. The skating rink was packed. Opening a candy or ice cream store was something you could easily do and be successful at. Grocery stores were always packed. You could get a good used car that would last you 10 years for $1,000, and you could get a house for what we now pay for cars. Story 8. Prince's song 1999 was played over and over. The year 2000 problem was overblown. There were panic buyers and scammers trying to push survival gear and guides, but most people with common sense just let it blow over. It was kind of cool to see the dawn of a new century. There were reports of people flying across state lines to experience the new year multiple times. Story 9. Year 2000 was a huge deal with all the purported computer issues, and it turned out to be a big nothing. But let's not forget there were years of work that went into fixing the issue so it would not be an issue. Did you know that Peter's job in Office Space was fixing the issue in banking software? Story 10. We spent a lot of time running basic input-output system checker to ensure basic input-output system were year 2000 compliant. We also spent a lot of time reviewing mainframe applications and modifying them to support 4-digit dates. Story 11. I was a teenager. The news posted about it heavily, but insisted that the government was working hard to prevent any failures. My family had complete faith that things would go okay, and I trusted them. My boyfriend's family went berserk and stockpiled years of food and necessities. It was insane. It made me question whether we were doing enough. Eventually, it was a bust, and everyone went about their lives. Story 12. Anyone else read this question as, "Hear ye all elder folk. Did you experience the great pre-modern technology transition of the 20th to 21st century? How did you feel about the transition experience? Did you record any historical accounts about your experience at the time?" Story 13. I was 15. The media made a huge deal for months about how all the banking and technological systems were going to collapse because the computers couldn't handle the change from 99 to 00 and whipped everyone into a frenzy. I remember during the day on New Year's Eve 1999, I was watching TV in between GoldenEye Nintendo 64 sessions and happened to see a news broadcast from Australia, where the clocks had already turned over. Everything was fine and it was a normal New Year's Eve. Went back to GoldenEye. Later on, my parents ordered Chinese takeout, and I spent the remainder of the evening making a fresh Nirvana compilation cassette for my Walkman, for when school started up again. The first track was Dive. Story 14. HBO Max has a pretty good documentary on it called Time Bomb Y2K. It gives a good overview of why it happened and how people reacted from a bunch of different viewpoints. Story 15. Nothing crazy different, to be honest, just another new year, which wasn't terrible, to be honest. Overwhelming optimism seemed to be everywhere, and we were at the forefront of a giant technology boom. It was exciting. Things changed after the September 11th attacks. Not trying to sound dramatic, but there was a notable shift, even for younger people and children. Story 16. Both hectic and anticlimactic. I staffed a war room on December 31st with 10 people, waiting for the world to end at midnight. Nothing happened. Got a day off for it. Story 17. I was 12 and at a neighborhood party. When the ball dropped and hit 0, someone in the house cut all the power. People started panicking. It was hilarious. Story 18. Just a bigger than average New Year's Eve party. A couple of friends got engaged at midnight. Bought a newspaper the next day with January 1st, 2000 date on it. Nothing really earth-shattering. Story 19. My mom fear bought like 15 gallons of water, but nothing else. My biggest concern was I wouldn't be able to celebrate my 13th birthday in a few weeks. Story 20. Media made it out to be a huge deal year 2000, like the world was going to break due to poor computer coding that only allowed 2 digits for the date. In the end, almost nothing happened. I am sure some things broke, but the general public was not affected in any way other than we started writing 4 digits for the year when writing out dates. Story 21. Less eventful than it was built up to be. I think a religious, superstitious part of me thought the world was slightly more likely to end than on any other given date, but not to the point that I was actively afraid. I was just 24, employed but mostly carefree, not much of a computer user at the time, so I wasn't terribly worried. I figured year 2000 issues would cause some inconveniences but no catastrophes. Story 22. I was a kid. There was a big conspiracy at the time that all power would go out at midnight. I do not remember the full details because I was too young to care. My uncle rode over on his horse and flipped our housebreaker at midnight. We screamed, and he had already ridden away by the time we got outside. I cannot remember how we figured out it was him. Other than that, it was like every other New Year. Story 23. I was 14. When nothing happened, we were shocked. Shortly after midnight, the lights did flicker briefly in the house, and we all freaked out like, here it goes. Story 24. I still remember New Year's Eve. We stood outside with thousands of people, counting down and preparing for the computer systems to fail. The only thing I noticed was that my friend's digital watch broke down. Apart from that, New Year's Eve was quieter than the one in Cologne in 2015. Story 25. The same as any other year change with two minor differences. 1. A small bit of concern for problems resulting from the year 2000 bug, none of which happened. A little bit of extra celebration based on 2000 being a big round number. Story 26. Lots of fear and uncertainty around computers, telecommunications, and electronics in general regarding the date change. In the event, nearly nothing happened beyond the expensive security and upgrades. Story 27. I was 17. My parents let me use the car and gave me permission to go to a New Year's Eve party, which should have been a dream scenario. I didn't drink, so I was not going to be a concern on the roads, but I was so freaking terrified of the year 2000 problem that I was home by 9:30, watching the news like a paranoid crazy person. Anxiety evaporated when 12:01 came around and the earth didn't explode. Story 28. I was 25 and working in information technology for a larger, older organization. There was a lot of business-critical stuff that still ran on mainframes in languages like Common Business-Oriented Language. We were very concerned, but also spent millions of dollars and about 5 years going through everything. Like with most of the world, the hardest thing on January 1st, 2000 was putting the right year on checks. We still wrote checks back then. Story 29. The end of the century music countdowns towards midnight were awesome, playing down the top sounds of the century. It really should have been the millennium, but it was more like the Billboard Top 100 for the last 20 years. Story 30. Other than having the flu that night, it was just like any other. I did cause some consternation with my friends when I pointed out that the year 2000 wasn't the first year of the 21st century, but rather the last year of the 20th. Story 31. Picture the biggest anticlimax you can imagine. Then take everything in that picture and color it in the drabbest and least inspiring shade of dull gray you can think of. It was a bit less exciting than that. Story 32. It's like being promised Disney World and ending up at the local parking lot COVID-19 carnival. Underwhelming as can be. The clock turned and I imagined things would happen. I'd feel different or something. Nah, just another day. Story 33. I was 12, almost 13, in the basement of a local Baptist church at a youth chemical-free night. Not quite chemical-free as it was my first experience with coffee. Bleck, I don't know how people drink that. Story 34. Oh my God, we had teams and committees for 18 months analyzing whether the systems could handle the transitions. In the end, New Year's Eve came and went, and those teams quietly parted ways. Story 35. I remember all of the stuff surrounding the year 2000 problem fiasco, but I did not believe a word of it. Subconsciously, however, I must have been worried because I remember having a very vivid end-of-the-world dream the night of December 31st, 1999. Story 36. Y2K panic was real. Some thought planes would fall, banks would collapse, and computers would crash. Meanwhile, most people just partied into the new millennium. Midnight hit and nothing happened. Just another day, but with way more hype. Story 37. We stocked up on a few things. Nothing crazy in case the power grid did go down. We had enough food and water put back to last about a month. We probably started preparation in September of that year. I'll be honest, I was kind of excited about it. Then nothing happened. Story 38. I was a teenager. So my mom worked in information technology for the Department of Defense, and she said everything was fine when I asked her about the year 2000 stuff. She briefly told me about what the concerns were, but pretty much said the problem was fixed and it was a non-issue. I believed her for the most part, but you know how humans have apocalyptic thinking, so it was still in the back of my mind that we might all die. I was babysitting a couple of neighborhood kids at my house while my mom and her friends were out celebrating. We ate snacks and watched the ball drop on television. Nothing happened. It was pretty anticlimactic, to be honest. I remember thinking it was pretty cool being a part of two different millennia, and not many people get to say they were born in an entirely different one. I still think it's pretty cool to think about how far we've advanced since then and look forward to telling my grandkids about the old days. Story 39, 1,000 times more hype than anything else. I remember on New Year's blasting REM. It's the end of the world as we know it, and waiting for things to start blowing up and planes to start falling out of the sky. Then nothing happened and we woke up the next day and carried on. Story 40. Everyone was on edge and anxious, but it turned out to be a whole lot of nothing but the biggest and best New Year's Eve parties ever. The only time I ever enjoyed a New Year's Eve out. Everyone I knew and everywhere I went that night, no one did that night halfway. The parties were huge, and it seemed like nobody held back an expense. Story 41. I was downtown in a big city, and I almost drank myself to death. I think I would have been 16 years old. I woke up the next day and went to work, very hungover. I apparently fought some people, threw up everywhere, and tried to fight my friends. Story 42. I was 15. From my perspective, it was uneventful. They had been warning about the year 2000 bug for a long time, and overall there was confidence that it had been addressed, despite some individual doomsayers. I remember it becoming more of a joke than anything. Being in the Western United States, most of the world had already experienced the date shift before us, so I wasn't concerned. The actual New Year was quite boring, just a friend and I hanging out. The bigger cultural shift was September 11th. That truly changed everything.